Hi everyone, hope you all are doing great. And thanks for your interest in our work in One Arrow, Two Kills, which is a unified framework for achieving optimal regret guarantees in Sleeping Bandits. More on the title later, but let me first introduce to my wonderful co-authors, Pierre Gaillard, who is from India Grenoble, France, and Soham, who is currently with IBM Research New York. And this work is going to be published in AISTATS 2023 this year. So please take a look at our poster if you are there. Uh, Excited to share more. And without any further delay, let's get started with the basic problem formulation that we addressed in this work. We essentially considered the problem formulation of classical multi-arm bandits, where essentially there are k bandit arms, and at every round, you as a learner or the player gets to pull one of the lever or the arm and see the corresponding reward or a noisy draw of reward from the underlying arm distribution associated to the jackpot liver. Your goal is to find basically the arm with the highest reward, or more formally, if there are k many number of arms, and suppose mu1 to mu k are the reward of the arms, and without loss of generalities, mu1 is greater than mu2 is greater than mu k, then arm 1 is the best arm. Say the best arm is also denoted by a star here. So your goal is to find the best arm as quickly as possible, often measured as regret minimization or best arm identification setup. Let me formally define the problem setup a little more carefully. In general, the rewards associated to the arms could be even adversarial, so the mu1 to mu k can in fact change across time. So that's the most general framework of adversarial multi-arm bandits. That's what we're going to study here. So note that at each round T, you as a learner select any arm KT from the bunch of arms K, and when you see the arm, when you pull the arm KT, you observe the underlying reward from the underlying reward distribution. Of course, you as a learner is not aware of what this muti is. You just see a random reward sample from the underlying distribution with expectation, reward expectation muti KT. Or equivalently, we can also assume that we see the loss, which is essentially minus of the reward, and the goal of the learner is to minimize the total expected regret across T rounds. So, for example, at round T, if you have played arm KT and the A star is potentially the best arm that you could have played, so for the loss of your loss as a learner for not playing the best arm is LTKT minus LT A star, and that summed over T rounds is the total loss of the learner, which is oftentimes called the total cumulative loss of the learner in T rounds. And oftentimes the objective is to minimize the total cumulative loss in a sublinear regret. So, which means that in the limit of infinite T, the average per trial regret should go to zero. That means your regret should be something which is sublinear in T, and that's why it can go to zero as your T becomes large. That essentially means that you as a learner is able to select KT more and more close to A star, and that's how you are getting more zero regret every round, and your average per trial regret is going to zero. So that's essentially the notion and the idea of minimizing the regret of multi-arm bandit. Of course, this has applications in various fields of real world systems, starting from clinical trials, healthcare applications, search engine optimizations, any kind of recommender systems, or even stock market prediction, or most recently the new development with ChatGPT. Everything has this aspect of online prediction system, and Bandit framework can be thrown in any of these situations to learn and train a better algorithm with this online bandit feedback. So let me just now go into more specific details of what we have done in this work. So that's about multi-arm bandit and its application. Suppose now, for certain reasons, some of the arms go unavailable. For example, say out of the k arms at time t equal to 1, you see that the first and the second arm is not available, which means that you cannot actually pull those arms and see the reward of it. This can happen for due to many reasons. For example, in search engine optimization, certain websites can be down, certain servers can be down, or in say movie recommendations, certain movies can be out of date, or say more generally in online retail change management, certain items can be out of stock, so you cannot actually recommend all the items all the time, but still you want to figure out the best item in the hindsight despite of this particular unavailability restriction. And this is famously is studied as sleeping bandits in multi-bandit literature, and you can assume that this arm rewards can be adversarial or stochastic, or even the availabilities can be adversarial or stochastic. So this framework of sleeping bandits and multi-arm bandit has been studied with various kind of availabilities and losses, whether it's stochastic or adversarial. In fact, in one of our earlier work in 2020 ICML, we considered the framework with adversarial reward and stochastic availabilities, and we gave the first order square root T algorithm for such setup for ordering regret. If someone is interested, please go and have a look at that paper, which is not the interest of this particular talk. We just wanted to mention it because later on we compared our algorithm with this algorithm at some point of time. But anyways, uh, this is a good work. If you want, just go and have a look. And this was the first algorithm, square root T algorithm for adversarial reward and stochastic availabilities for sleeping bandits. Before this, the best existing results was T to the power 2/3, which were suboptimal dependency in T. Okay, so coming to the problem setup of sleeping multi-arm bandits, it's just the same picture that we have seen earlier, but the additional twist now comes with the fact that now there is a set of available arms ST that is disclosed to the learner at the beginning of any round T, and the learner has to choose an arm KT, not from the set of all arms, but only the set of available arms ST now. So that being the only twist, and the rest of the scenario situation remains the same. Note that the earlier notion of regret does not make any sense at this point, because it doesn't make sense. It's unfair, in fact, to make the learner compete with the best fixed arm A star, because that A star might not even be available at every round. So what arm should you compare it with? How do you define the regret? Actually, what is the fair way to define the regret, and how do we minimize the regret? This problem is more generally studied as sleeping bandits for adversarial losses, stochastic losses, or adversarial availabilities, stochastic availabilities in the literature of bandits. And these are like series of work, and there has been more recent works which we have cited in the papers. If someone is interested in the literature, please go and take a look at the literature survey of our paper. Um, but given that, what confusion lies in the fact that people have studied different notion of sleeping regrets. For example, there is a notion of external sleeping regret that has been studied by Blum and Mansoor in 2007 first. Here, the learner essentially is compared with respect to a fixed arm K. For any K, it is always compared to a fixed arm only if the arm is available on those rounds. So, for example, a sleeping external regret with respect to an arm K is essentially the regret of the learner with respect to arm K whenever K is available in the subset. Similarly, another notion that has been popularly studied for sleeping bandits is the notion of ordering regret, where suppose you have some fixed ordering across the k arms and consider all possible k factorial ordering of the arms. Your regret is defined with respect to the ordering as in like according to ordering, which is the best arm available. So sigma of st is the best available arm in that subset at time t, and this is lt of kt is what you have played. So this is basically the loss you incurred for not playing the best available arms according to the ordering, and that summed over all round is basically the ordering regret across t rounds. There's also something called a policy regret, and a policy is essentially a mapping from a subset to a set of key arms. And what happens is in policy regret, when you compare the performance of the learner against a fixed policy, the loss of the learner is again what is the regret or loss of the learner for not playing the arm according to the policy, because the policy would play the arm pi of st. That's the policy's recommendation, and you played kt. So what is the loss of the learner, you as a learner, for playing arm kt and summed over all rounds is essentially the policy regret. The confusing part here is there could be even other notions of sleeping regret has been studied, and so many different notions of sleeping regret. It's not clear if what is the implication of one regret to the other. So in case if I'm designing algorithm for minimizing ordering regret, does that also imply a low policy regret? Or if I'm minimizing external regret, does that also imply a low policy regret or ordering regret? What is the implication of these notions of regret? What is a unified framework here? So because independently all these algorithms exist, but they do not really imply what could be the performance of those algorithms for a different scenario or for a different measure of regret. This is the crucial problem that we addressed in this work, where we tried coming up with a unified framework of sleeping regret that can capture all these existing notions of regret in one frame. And that's our primary contribution of this work, which we call sleeping internal regret. This is a new notion of sleeping regret that we proposed in our work. So sleeping internal regret is essentially defined for every pair of arms, and it essentially depicts the regret of any learner for playing the arm KT and not playing arm J. So more precisely, suppose at any round, if you have played arm I as KT as your choice of arm, and you are being measured your regret against the arm J. So what is your regret for playing arm I and not J? That's basically the sleeping internal regret for those rounds where you have played arm I as your choice, and J was available, and summed over all T rounds. That's essentially your sleeping internal regret for the pair IJ. What we shown in this work as a primary contribution is that sleeping internal regret essentially implies sleeping external regret as well as ordering regret in various framework. So the first thing first, when it comes to sleeping external regret, we can show that sleeping internal regret always implies external regret, which means that if we have a sublinear regret guarantee, sublinear regret algorithm for sleeping internal regret, then we have a sublinear regret algorithm for external regret as well. Or in other words, sleeping external regret can be upper bounded by sleeping internal regret, no matter if the losses are stochastic or adversarial and availabilities are stochastic or adversarial. On the other hand, when it comes to policy regret, it's a slightly stronger, it's actually the stronger notion of regret. So the sleeping internal regret does not always imply ordering regret, but whenever the losses are stochastic, sleeping internal regret implies an ordering regret. Although it's still an open question for us to understand what happens if the losses are adversarial and the availabilities are stochastic. Does it also imply ordering regret? It's not very clear. Not only we understand the implication of sleeping internal regret with the other notions of regret, we also understand the internal implications of different existing notions of regret. For example, sleeping external regret only implies ordering regret for stochastic losses and stochastic availabilities, which is sort of obvious because sleeping external regret is a weaker notion of regret. Whereas ordering regret is a very powerful notion of regret. So these two are equivalent only if in a very easy scenario where both the losses and the availabilities are stochastic. On the other hand, if the losses are stochastic and the availabilities are adversarial, then ordering regret would imply sleeping external regret, and that's why the implication is also correct. Okay, so I think I have just made the frame too unclear with too many, so let me just erase all the ink on the slide. Okay. And here is another point to make is that we also understand what is the implication between ordering regret and the policy regret. The thing is, whenever the losses or the availabilities are stochastic, so either losses or the availabilities are stochastic, and the losses are independent on the availabilities, the ordering regret implies policy regret. So this is also another result that we have in our appendix. If someone is interested in the proof, please go and have a look. It's fairly easy proof, but still it's good in terms of the intuition or basic understanding of different notions of regret and their internal implications. So it's also known that ordering regret or the policy regret is NP hard to optimize when both losses and availabilities are adversarial. So for all practical purposes, if one of those two components are stochastic, these two are actually equivalent. So in throughout our work, we'll actually assume that ordering regret and policy regret is equivalent, because either we will be studied in the stochastic losses and stochastic availability framework. So now we have a much more better picture of different notions of regret, and when minimizing one would also imply minimizing the other. And that's the key result of this work, which we called one arrow, two kills. So basically, we can kill the different notions of regret with just one arrow, which is basically our proposed notion of sleeping internal regret, because minimizing this actually implies minimizing several other, in fact it's one arrow multiple kills, because we can imply this, minimizing this implies minimizing several other notions of regrets: external regret, ordering regret, policy regret, in different kind of loss scenarios. So that's the motivation and the justification behind our title. The key question now is, can we actually design an algorithm which minimizes sleeping internal regret? And one more key point to note here is that we actually design an algorithm, and not only we have this algorithm, the algorithm actually minimize the sleeping internal regret even if the losses and availabilities both are adversarial, which is the strongest possible scenario one can imagine. And even then, we can actually minimize sleeping internal regret for all possible pair of arms. So let's take a look at the algorithm that we have. So what is the algorithm for minimizing sleeping internal regret? For that, it's a very simple algorithm. The algorithm essentially maintains k order k choose to fictitious experts. Each expert is assigned in charge of controlling the internal regret of the I to J pair. So I replaced with J pair. And the procedure is a two-level algorithm. The algorithm essentially maintain a order k choose to vector, initially initialized with a uniform distribution. At any point of time when it receives a set st, it redistribute the masses so that only the pair of arms where j is available gets a non-zero weight, or otherwise it gets a zero weight with it, because obviously there is no point of replacing the item with j, as j is no longer when available, so those experts are anyways available, anyways eliminated from our decision space. So that's the justification of this weight distribution. And once we have qt, which is the distribution over the pair of available sort of experts, we solve a fixed point equation here to find a distribution over the arms. So PT is a distribution over the K arms, but however, it only gets non-zero weights if an arm is available. So PT is greater than zero if I is in the set ST. I belongs to the set ST. So essentially, PT has the support only on the set ST, and that's happens because the way PTIJ is defined, because of particular PTIJ and QTIJ is defined. So it's basically the design of our weight distributions. PT automatically gets assigned to zero weights if a particular item is not available. Once we solve PT with solving this fixed point equation, we can play our arm KT from PT, and obviously we'll not play any arm which is not available because PT does not have any weight on those arms. Now we have PT, we will see the loss, and we will use some important sampling estimator to find the losses of every individual arm, and from that individual loss estimates we can also find the loss estimate of the pairwise experts that we are maintaining. This is one of the key point of our algorithm design, that how we define this estimated losses on the pair of experts, or how do we maintain the estimated losses, estimated weights on the pair of available experts. There lies the novelties and of our algorithm design techniques. We have more intuitions and technicalities defined in the paper. So if someone is interested, please go and have a look at our paper, and things must be more clear then. And we'll be very happy to answer any questions if you have. So given now we have this loss estimates updated through the importance sampling estimate, we can just update the distribution over the experts through exponential weight update. And that's essentially the algorithm. So repeat. That's essentially how our total algorithm looks like. And if we do the regret analysis of this algorithm, which we call the simple SIEXP3 algorithm, even the availability and the losses are both adversarial. For every pair of arm, we can show that we have a order square root KT regret for this algorithm. Now we have a good algorithm for sleeping internal regret. What is the implication that we have for the other regret bounds? And that's very easy to derive because we already have this picture, and we already know how the other notions of regret could be upper bounded with internal regret. For example, we have shown in the paper that sleeping external regret for any arm K for availabilities losses could be, even if the availabilities and losses are adversarial, it is always equal to the sum over some internal regrets over the pair of arms ik, where k runs from all over all the arms, uh, and basically I runs from over all the arms. And of course, because of the summation over k, we can show that if we have a square root kt algorithm for sleeping internal regret, we have a k square root kt algorithm for sleeping external regret. The algorithm dependency is optimal in T. However, the dependency on k can be improved. We think that it is suboptimal by a k factor, and it is an open question to see if we can actually improve this with this unified framework analysis. And the second thing is obviously internal ordering regret or policy regret, because as we motivated, both are interchangeable. So ordering regret, whenever the stochastic losses or the either of the losses or the availabilities are stochastic, ordering regret implies policy regret. So both can be upper bounded by this summation over sort of pairwise summation over different pairs of internal regrets. So if we have square root kt algorithm for internal regret, then we have order k square root kt algorithm for the ordering regret because of this implication here. So essentially, we have one arrow and one algorithm to hit that arrow, and that basically also implies not only a sublinear sleeping internal regret, but sublinear external regret, ordering regret, policy regret, and everything. I mean, of course, we have to be careful about the condition on the losses and the availabilities, so that should be clear from the figure, but we basically captured the framework of Sleeping Bandits quite well with this unified framework, and that's very exciting. Not only that, we have another follow-up result which shows that not only we can have good regret bounds for multi-arm bandit, even for dwelling bandit, this has implications. The sleeping internal regret has very nice implications. For those who are not aware of a dwelling bandit framework, let me motivate it very quickly. So in dwelling bandit, unlike multi-arm bandit, where we actually can pull an arm and see the reward of the arm, in dwelling bandit we can pull a pair of arm, say IT and JT at every round T. There's a small typo here. This should not be TT. This is AT. So when you have sleeping dwelling bandits, you also see a possible set of available arms in a, because you have to choose a pair of arms. Now the decision space is k square pair of total arms, repeated arms being all of also a possible entry in the decision space. And when you pull two arms IT and JT, what you get to see as a learner is a noisy observation OT is in 0 or 1. So 0 implies that IT is preferred over JT, and 1 implies the other way around. So you see a noisy 0 1 feedback from an underlying preference matrix P, which is of course not known to the learner. This preference matrix is unknown to the learner, so it's unknown to the algorithm that you're designing. But just to motivate the idea of this preference matrix, any ijth entry of the preference matrix just implies that if you pull the item I against the item J, so you may basically make the item I compete with item J, or with what probability you should see item I beating item J. So if you pull item 2 and item 4, essentially with what probability you will see item I beats J. So in this case, the OT would be just a Bernoulli draw with a bias 0.58. That's what you get to see as a learner. So just a 1 beat 0 1 feedback. I hope that makes sense. And assuming that there is some underlying fixed best arm. So it's not very clear from this preference matrix what could be a best arm. However, we can assume that there is a total ordering or some utility based preferences in which a fixed ordering is there based on the preferences, and maybe you want to find the best arm in the hindsight. But more generally, our regret notion, which we'll see in a moment, is much more general. One thing to mention here is that preference matrices always have this property that preference with which probability with which I beats j is always 1 minus the probability j beats I. So this is sort of kind of an anti-symmetric kind of preference matrix. So the diagonal matrices are always zero point 0.5 in any preference matrix. And again, this is not known. You go on doing this round-wise game for t many number of rounds, and the question is if what is the notion of regret that you can imagine in this scenario? Because we are studying the sleeping dueling bandit setup, because we also assume that there is a sleeping aspect in it, and not all the pair of arms are. You can't play all the pair of arms, but only a certain pair of arms is actually realizable at any point of time t. So we have to make the regret definition based on the available set of arms. In general, look at if it is the left arm is what you have played. It is always being compared with respect to j star, which j star is basically kind of the best available competitor in the preference matrix that you have, and jt is essentially the best available, and I star here is the best available competitor of the second arm jt. So as if every arm is being competed with respect to its possible best available competitor present in the pair of available arms. And minus one is just to make sure that you get a zero regret if you actually play optimally. It's just a origin correction. It's not very important. And just divide by two because you just want the average regret of the two arms that you have played. That's the notion of sleeping internal dueling bandit regret that we came up with. Two crucial points to note here is that this notion of sleeping internal regret for dueling bandits actually generalizes the usual notion of sleeping regret, dueling bandit regret that has been studied in literature for various numerous work. We have all the references in the paper, so if you're interested, look at the dueling bandit section in our paper. But this generalizes the typical notion of dueling bandit regret that has been studied, where both the arms are actually compared with respect to a fixed benchmark. This is actually much more general because sometimes repeating the arm, so many times when we have a Condorcet winner assumption, repeating the arm and playing the Condorcet winner arm twice is the best action, but it might not even make sense in some real world situations where suppose you want to find the top two items in the um for your application. For example, you're trying to recommend the top two movies to a user or top two set of jackets or shoes or whatever you want to recommend to the users. It doesn't make sense to show them repeated items because actually you don't get any feedback if you show repeated same items. We can capture that thing with our notion of regret, which is not capturable with the existing notion of dwelling bandit regret, because we can essentially say that in the second pair of arm the repeated entries are not possible. So AT does not have such pairs where repeated pairs are not available. So essentially you have to go on end up pulling the two arms, which is the best and the second best arm. And our algorithm essentially is able to do it, where all the existing dueling algorithm fails miserably in that situations. So we have also a very general notion of dueling bandit regrets, which is exciting. We are excited to study this in more general frameworks. More about this in the paper. So if you're interested in dueling bandits, please have a look at it and let us know your suggestions on this. Coming to the applications very quickly, there is plenty of motivations. Now we are throwing machine learning algorithms to sort of every prediction tasks in our day-to-day life, starting from movie recommendation, restaurant recommendation, search engine, online retail change management, online education, various systems. Humans are often much more, comfortable, unbiased, giving feedback in terms of preferences rather than absolute rewards. So the absolute reward variant has been studied with the multi-arm bandit scenario, but the relative variant and the user preferences, capturing the user preferences through this relative variant and training the system, updating the system through the user preferences has been a key part of study. So dueling bandit literature has been popular for quite few decades now, starting from 2009, 2008. This has been popularized, and there's plenty of applications of dueling bandits that one can think of. Coming back to our setup, so this is the notion of sleeping internal dueling bandit regret and how do we minimize it. And I'll not go into too much of details of it again because I'm already quite out of time. If someone is interested, please take a look at the algorithm we have detailed in the paper. Very high level, we actually use a sparring technique here, which essentially a technique where a multi-bandit algorithm is made compete with itself. And now we already have this SIEXP3 algorithm that we have seen in detail in the earlier slides, which is actually for designed to work for multi-arm bandit. The key idea that we had is that this notion of sleeping internal regret can be decomposed into two different notion of regret, two different notion of multi-arm bandit regret, where the first regret can be viewed as the relative strength of the left arm IT against the best available arm. So this could be potentially the regret of one multi-arm bandit, and the second part in the decomposition can be seen as the relative strength of the right arm against the best arm available. This too can be individually seen as the regret of two separate multi-arm bandit problems, especially when the losses are adversarial. This makes sense. So now we have two different instances of multi-arm bandit problem. We can actually use two separate multi-arm bandit algorithm instances to optimize this regret, and we use SIEXP3 as this underlying multi-banded black box to optimize this. Coming to the question of the feedback, of course we see the feedback which is a 0-1 loss feedback, but roughly speaking the 0-1 loss feedback can be fed as individual losses to the corresponding arm depending on which arm has been won. So we maintain two copies of SIEXP3. Each copy will recommend IT and JT, and their own possible recommendation. We'll play them as IT and JT, and we'll see an outcome, OT. So whichever arm wins, we'll send the corresponding algorithm a reward of 1, and the other algorithm gets a reward of 0. Similarly, the loss. And we update the SIEXP3 algorithm and just play it like that. So that's the idea of sparring SIEXP3. So we basically maintain two copies of SIEXP3 and do all the sparring and play it 40 rounds. And ultimately, this is the regret guarantee we get, which is not bad at all. We get a regret guarantee of order square root KT times K square. Of course, the K square factor could be uh, improved to order k, to the best of our understanding, but the dependency on t is actually optimal, and this is actually a very very good regret guarantee for dwelling bandits, for sleeping dwelling bandits. In fact, this regret guarantee has not been studied for any before, and we can actually end up getting the top two items in our subset if we want. Unlike the repeated kind of entries, it all lies in how we tweak our available set of arms, and we can get the repeated entries. We can also like consume the earlier notion of regret that has been studied, but also we can capture the repeated entries or non-repeated entries, and a lot of things can be done with this general notion of dueling and regret. We are really excited to study this further. Finally, we also have experimental results in our paper, so that's also, we have more in the paper, we have lots in the paper. These are all synthetic experiments, but if someone is interested, please go and take a look at the particular environment we have studied it on. Very briefly, we are just studying it in the multi-bandit setup here, and look that when the environment is stochastic, so that's in the first column. When the environment is stochastic, that means the losses and the adversary at the availabilities both are stochastic. Then you can actually see that the existing methods, especially the UCB method, performs very well. Performs quite well. In fact, SEXP3, which is one of our earlier work, the ICML 2020 work which we cited earlier, that performs even better in those situations, because that's not really what the target area of our algorithm is. But the moment the losses start getting dependent on the environment, then we actually outperform a lot. So SIEXP3 outperforms a lot because the other algorithms are not even designed to perform well when there is dependency in the losses and the availabilities. Similarly, the same situation happens if there is a more more adversarial environment like rock paper scissors, or more confusing environments like that, our algorithm performs quite well. So we have details of the environments we have studied these frameworks. So please take a look at the paper, and we also have the codes available in the GitHub repository, so it's freely available, and if you want to use it, please go and have a look at it. Make sure you cite our work, but just or let us know if you have any questions. So that's all. Thanks a lot for your attention. Just summarizing, we have a one arrow, which is essentially the arrow is internal sleeping regret. That's a notion of regret that we come up with, and a very, very powerful unified notion of regret that can help us to actually minimize different notion of sleeping regret studied in the literature, studying from policy regret to ordering regret to sleeping external regret. And we actually gave a new algorithm which we called SIEXP3, an XP3 based algorithm, but of course it is tweaked with several new ideas that we explained in the SIEXP3 algorithm. We also did an regret analysis which has the order square root kt regret, and it implies also sublinear regret for different notions of regret depending on what is the condition of the situation of the losses and the availabilities and the interdependencies on those. Finally, our bound also implies dwelling nice new notions of dwelling bandit regrets in the sleeping setup, which has not been studied earlier. It's much more powerful than the existing notion of dwelling regret studied, much more powerful and generalized. In future, it might be very interesting to see that note that we had this SI regret, and we had this implication to ordering regret only if the losses are stochastic and the availabilities could be anything. So it could be even adversarial availabilities. But what might be nice to see is that if the losses are adversarial and the availabilities are stochastic, then can this implication also holds good? This would be something very interesting to study, because if it is true, then ordering regret essentially can be minimized with sleeping internal regret in all possible scenarios, because if both of them are adversarial anyways, we don't have hope to minimize ordering regret. So this would be a very nice result, and sleeping internal regret will be truly versatile to capture all possible different existing notions of sleeping regret available. And other extensions could be, of course, to extend it into the bandit scenarios, in the contextual bandit scenarios, or even like when you can pull multiple arms, or even for more limited feedback scenarios, for example, feedback graph models or Partial monitoring games, or some generalized bandit feedback. And we also study the generalized such limited feedback setup in the sleeping framework, and what could be a notion of generalized unified notion of regret in that case, what could be the arrow to kill all possible different generalized notions of sleeping regrets in limited feedback scenario. So those are like the high level and very optimistic objectives that we have. So that's all about this work we wanted to cover, and thank you so much for your attention. Sorry that was a little too too detailed. So if you have more questions, we'll be very, very happy to answer that. Please feel free to write me or my co-authors on this. And if you are there in AISTATS, please stop by our poster. And we'll see you soon. Bye. Thank you so much.